the fourth feature that X is really pushing is that you're going to be able to unleash an unhinged 8th grader bot that's just going to go and rip you on everything that you've ever done on the internet somewhere and really make you feel bad about it.
I've already got that. I just have to. I've got that in real life with my son.
Welcome to the show, where air takes the floor. Lee and Rich on the mic.
Welcome to the AI Guys podcast, where we make artificial intelligence easy to understand for everyone. I'm your host, Lee Dixon, and as always, I'm joined by the only person I outlined in my New Year's resolutions, Rich Swire.
That's a privilege. It's a privilege.
Yeah, man.
It's an honor.
I was saying, now that we got the play button, next resolution, is to hit that million. Might not happen this year, but definitely on the rise, and we're excited to have all these listeners here.
Yeah, our street cred is at a whole nother high right now.
You walk down Sarasota and someone goes, "Hey," and you go, "Yeah," and they go, "Never mind," because they don't recognize you with the hat and everything. You let everything flow when you're wandering through Sarasota.
Yeah, it's branded. People know me, or at least they yell at me, and I just acknowledge it as fans.
Yeah, I figured they actually think we look like the avatar that's on our podcast. Just those two cartoon robots screaming at each other.
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah. But today, brand new year, new topics to hit. So we're going to be diving into the AI hot topics that we think everyone should be keeping their eye on in 2025, both on the consumer side and for business applications. So let's kind of start off with, really where we like to start everything. What's next for the LLMs? Like, there has been some news out there, and I know you're going to want to expound on this a little bit, but people are saying that we're running out of data, and I'm not sure I agree with that wholly. But what do you believe is kind of next for LLM, training with this thought of synthetic data generation and highlighting maybe what some of these companies are starting to focus on and how to utilize synthetic data?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of level set it for people who may not necessarily be in the AI world is, these large language models, which is what's driving the core of generative AI, the ChatGPT experience and all these other things you see out there, whether it be images, video, text. These are built off these massive models, which are called foundational models. But in order to create a foundational model, it takes a ridiculous amount of data. In fact, the theory is, and I guess it's become fact, is that the more data you feed these, the better they get. And so obviously the biggest database we have, for the most part, is the public internet. And of course, that's where it started, scraping different websites and compiling that in and training these models. And it typically takes hundreds of thousands of GPUs, and 6 months is like your average, time to train. And so a tremendous amount of energy, tremendous amount of time to build these out. But also at the same time, they've been going at it for 2-3 years. And I guess the theory on the street is that, there's very little data to train on that has been untouched, right? So the idea of, if you want to make these models better, is that you have to start kind of creating new data to feed back into the models. And so you're starting to see kind of a layered approach where these companies have these very large, what I would call dirty models, which they just kind of go out and grab a ton of stuff off the internet, good or bad, or ugly. And, the early stage models were kind of that way. And that's why there was a lot of hallucinations. That's why there was a lot of bad data, because it just wasn't really going to put through the ringer. Then meanwhile, you're collecting all this human feedback data, including people who used ChatGPT. Obviously, they train on that information. And then, thumbs up, thumbs down, all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. And then now what they're thinking about doing, or they're doing, is they're taking those models and they're feeding it itself its own data and creating these more fine-tuned models from that. And so synthetic data is kind of the way that you would describe that, although it's somewhat of a nuanced definition because it is more complicated than how I outlined it. But imagine if you read a book and that, as a human, you're trained on that book because you read it, but then you started taking that story and expanding on it, like many, creatives do. Like you watch Star Wars and you start saying, "Oh, it'd be so much cooler if,
Isn't that basically what they did with the 8th season of Game of Thrones? Like, you just didn't finish it, and they're like, "We got this from here," and they didn't.
Exactly. So anytime that you use your imagination to expand on a story that you've learned, I guess technically you would call that synthetic data, right? You created data off of another data source. So, but the idea of the the party being over, where there's not much data left to train on, is kind of, I think, a little bit of a misconception. Although it's probably, I would rephrase it as we're running out of easy to get data. I'll put it that way, right? Scraping the internet has been kind of what's driven most businesses, like Google. That's what they do, right? They scrape the internet and they make it searchable. So it's become kind of a commodity to be able to do that. In fact, there's open source solutions out there that scrape the internet and license it. So the easy stuff, I would say, is probably running dry. And that's why you're seeing companies go out and license proprietary data, like OpenAI has done licensing deals with a lot of data creators like newspapers and others. You're going to start to penetrate into the firewall. So there's a ton of data, right, behind firewalls in databases that are proprietary. Now, whether foundation models will actually train on that and provide it to the public is probably not the case. But internally, as a business, if you're a pharmaceutical company and you build your own model, then certainly there's a ton of data on your internal databases that you can train on. So when they talk about running out of data, what they're really saying is the internet, public internet, the good stuff has already been trained on. And now, how do we now kind of continue and improve these models so they become smarter? And there's a lot of theory out there on the best way to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we could do an entire separate episode, which we probably will have coming up in the coming weeks, talking about like the sustainability of training and, the energy potential. And I don't want to use the term crisis, but it's like, that is on the horizon in 2025, trying to figure out, as models and applications and uses get bigger, like how to, realistically support that from an energy side of things. When we're getting into like the training side, you did touch on something there where you were saying having the model essentially create or feed back its own content to like refine it deeper than that. I would take that in the same way of like, I go in, utilize as a consumer ChatGPT and refine like my prompting a little bit. But if I wanted to, let's say, recreate an image or take something that I saw out there and say like, hey, use this and tell me the best way to prompt that back to you to like replicate. Right now, that's kind of taking it a step further. And maybe the term synthetic is a little bit misleading because it's not really coming, from me. But it is just being able to take that dirty model and just make it slightly more refined over and over and over again. But then you take that deeper into a business or into a specific, use case that's taking off with it now, and having that trained generative space available to now be refined just on my knowledge as a business. I think that's really where, like you said, these models are now looking at it as like, we've done our job to give you something that's like 70% there. And now from here, it's about you making it really make sense for you.
Yeah. There's a lot of different angles to creating new data, whether it's, through just prompting through hypotheticals, like you mentioned, creating iterative, just different permutations, right? There's different permutations of things that occur, revisionist history, all these different angles that you could take. It's kind of like throwing or creating, like as you mentioned, use images, and images is probably where synthetic data is being used the most in video. It's like creating and merging, two completely disparate things into one image and then using that to then train on a new image, right? So it's really just a matter of, at this point, where the scale's coming from. Now, there's another component, there's another force at nature here that the LLMs are kind of paying attention to, which is more on less on the training side, which is kind of the brute force stuff that has been done to build out the model, and moving the attention to inference. And so that's really on the real-time side of the AI equation. So
you don't need it all the time, but when you do, here it
is. It's going from long-term memory to short-term memory. And this is where like some of the new models, like what OpenAI has with O1 and is where they're putting a lot more processing on the inference side, which is, okay, I'm going to give you a task, or I'm going to give you a question, and then the model is going to actually real time process, think, and work through a series of of chains of thought that is going to give you a better answer. So, I mean, we are, even though that LLMs might have reached a pretty maximum output for what the input has been, and the cost is obviously very vast. So you can't continue to throw money down at the pace of 2x every year. You know, we've gone from $1 billion models to $10 billion models and so forth. Obviously, that can't continue because people just run out of money. So I think a lot of the attention is also focusing now on this year for sure on inference, and that certainly is the case. When you see these data centers being built out and the new chips that are coming out with NVIDIA, their focus as well. And they actually think it's going to be probably 10x. The usage is going to be more on the front end than on the back end. So that's, I think, the next step this year that these guys are looking at. And it'll be exciting to see what comes from it. But it'll definitely feel more like you're talking to an LLM or a model that's thinking. Whereas instead of it being, I think, when
autoresponder,
just responding, right?
Yeah,
I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, well, since you think that LLMs are pretty much like old news and we shouldn't ever talk about them ever again, let's get into what the big boys have been doing. Obviously things with Grok, X, OpenAI, Google, like everyone is. We talked about the arms race, I think, in a really early episode, right? Of like, how are people going to start doing this? And I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like the like 60 to 90 days has essentially just been like a Royal Rumble. Everyone's just getting in the ring and, throwing haymakers and putting on a show in a lot of ways, and kind of seeing what the crowd cheers for, right? And what they are kind of silent on, and then they just push back on and take off the foot on the gas there. So if there's ones you specifically want to dive into, we absolutely can talk about it. I wanted to start kind of with Elon and doing the standalone AI app with Grok, but also this unhinged mode, which to me, I think actually puts a little bit more of a detriment on AI adoption more than it helps it. But how do you feel about stuff like that? Because I know you built, just for fun, like an agent that just rips you and is just an absolute troll for your son and everything like that. And it was more, again, as a gag to be like, hey, look what we can do. And now you have something that's essentially being teased as like, hey, this is going to be something everyone can play with and enjoy. And it's like, it's one of the reasons I kind of hate the internet, like is because of ideas like this gaining traction that ultimately I don't think move forward the narrative at all, that AI is, not just a gimmick, you know what I mean? In some ways. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can expect the AI to kind of do the same thing the internet did, right? You're going to have bad, the good, the ugly. I mean, people are going to use the internet for nefarious things, evil things, but also just kind of goofy things. And unfortunately, sometimes the goofy stuff is what people use it for the most. And AI will be no different. It's the first thing that you do with any technology, right? Is you go to the lowest common denominator, the caveman mentality. You can almost always see it. Anytime something new is presented that's really like groundbreaking, you can almost guarantee there's somebody in the room that's going to do something sophomoric with it. It's like, okay, sure. We just spent $1 billion training a model for you to do that. Okay, great.
Exactly.
And just so Elon
just
is the
roast their friends.
Elon is their leader. So Elon is the most sophomoric, billionaire out there. And but I do appreciate. I think every hyperscaler and everybody who's going after this kind of arms race has a kind of a different personality and a different angle, and I think that becomes very clear in how they are deploying and how their vision for AI is. So on one hand, you have this, the Google, which is like the big mountain that nobody can move, is coming at it from a very different angle on how they deploy value than Apple is. And same thing with Grok. So Elon, in his truest form, I think is coming at it from because his primary source for building out his AI models for training is going to be Twitter. So it's going to probably shadow quite a bit of what Twitter is, right? Free speech, real-time information, a lot of conversation, and a lot of diversity of opinion. So most likely Grok and AI and what he trains on is going to have that slant, whereas maybe Google's AI may not have as much of a real-time element to it outside of going back to defaulting to their search engine, because Twitter and social media has a much more instantaneous type of engagement. So he's going to build his tool sets around that and where his strength is, where his moat is.
Do you think it speeds up maybe not the conversational aspect as much, but like, we're talking about inference training, right? And like kind of assuming what's coming next. So not to say that Twitter or even like everything within the Meta family of products, right, is the best source for knowledge, but because of just the sheer volume and frequency that things take place there, and because a lot of it is conversational, or at least providing data out versus like a Google, which would be I'm putting in information trying to extract. Do you think that maybe just speeds them up and catches them up faster?
Yeah.
For that reason?
Yeah, because really nobody else has what he has. People sit here and talk about how Twitter's dead, or Twitter's valueless, or that he's lost all this money, and they're just not seeing, I think, the forest and the trees, in the sense that technically Twitter is really the only platform that has real-time,
like AI first mentality now,
conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have conversations on Facebook, right? You don't really have conversations on Instagram. They're social media platforms, but they're very thin. And the only other conversation platform that's out there is like Reddit, and some of these others. But even those are not really real time. They're more, okay, this, somebody posted something, maybe 5 minutes later, somebody else does this. Twitter, as what we thought, or what we thought, what our experience of Twitter in the past and how we thought of Twitter, is no longer really the goal of what Twitter is anymore. He clearly is very focused on building out AI and an AI system that is trained on Twitter. So today, it's basically just flipped the script. Yeah. It wasn't, he didn't buy a social media company that he wants to continue everybody to talk on for advertising. That's why he told advertisers to go F off, because in his mind, he's like, the future isn't advertising. The future is not even that they're going to be on Twitter we're not going to want to even advertise to them. We just want them to keep coming on Twitter, keep talking.
Just be here.
Post all this information that you possibly can, be the source be the number one media source, and then I will train my AI on that, and I will make money that way. So he's like, I think he's always, visionary, obviously, in the way he thinks, and I think he is able to place a pretty large bet. I'm certain that he probably wishes he didn't overpay for Twitter, but at the same time, I think Twitter is probably the most valuable commodity out there right now, outside of maybe YouTube, that provides content to drive. We talked about it, the shortage of data. Well, who's generating the most quality data right now? It's going to be YouTube and Twitter.
Yeah, and quick shout out to our sponsor today, ex-CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, who paid us a lot of money to stop calling it X, and just wants us to call it Twitter the whole time.
Yeah, I refuse to call it X. No. Yeah, we should call it X. But I think if we called it X, people would be like, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is synonymous, but I don't know. Again, I could go on a whole tangent of where I think, Twitter has kind of gone in when it merged into X, and just like you said, kind of trickled down from there. But again, I'm looking at it from a consumer perspective. He's looking at it, and the reason why it is still, a prominent platform for most people is, it is a hub that they have been taught how to use it, and it's where people go to do what they want to do. And not every single social media platform has, I think, that same platform, or at least platformic approach that X has been able to build. So yeah, it is where it is, and it's allowing him to probably be in the race now when he wouldn't have been if he didn't have it. So that's very true.
He deployed, built out this AI training center in Tennessee or whatever. It should be coming online with Grok. I forgot the version, like 3 or something like that, in the next month or two. And I think it's probably going to be it is the most powerful supercomputer out there. That's kind of what NVIDIA's CEO Hinson mentioned. And so I'm expecting that Grok is going to just really catch up very quickly, especially if on the inference side. So I would fully expect that within a few months that Twitter's user experience is going to be very similar to what it is today, in the sense of you go on there and you communicate and you tweet and all this good stuff. But I think you're going to have a much heavier AI component, like a ChatGPT type interface in there. It already has it with Grok, but it's going to be much heavier. And of course, the vision of X is to create a super app, and that super app has really 3 components. One being interface with AI, an untethered interface with AI, and that's another advantage that he has. because he doesn't care and he believes in free speech and you can generate whatever you want, and he's okay with that. Number two is that, and he's kind of earned his stripes in the sense of like he's done it with Twitter, so he kind of understands how to deal with that. Whereas maybe an OpenAI doesn't have that capacity or facility or knowledge or experience. And then I think number two on the super app side is he's going to continue to build out the best possible community. I have heard on the street, and when I say I've heard on the street, it's really just my son telling me that that the bot activity has gone down dramatically, and I think a lot of that has to do with some of the things he's implemented, including probably AI, and also taking away the API and not allowing for people to programmatically put messages in there. So he made some pretty unpopular decisions that seem to be fixing the network. And then number three is he's going to, kind of build into a payment system, whether that and dip his toe into e-commerce. So I think X is going to be a pretty significant, and make some pretty significant moves and surprise a lot of people. So he's the one to watch this year, I think, because he has, obviously he's proven that he can deliver on big ideas. And
and tied in the political climate, it's only going to get bigger and bigger with
forget about factoring that in. I think the Facebooks of the world and the Apples of the world, when you talk about consumer AI, are probably going to have a couple of like really interesting things. I think Apple will probably bring kind of continue to iterate on Siri and continue to iterate on having AI integrate with your apps. I'm expecting probably mid-year they're going to have a new kind of an app store update that is going to probably let apps interface their AI in a more seamless manner, and their APIs will be updated. So that'll probably come out this year. So that might encourage more AI usage, right? So like, hey, AI, book me an Uber, and it would just navigate through the app. So I'm guessing a lot of apps are going to have to adapt and figure out how they're going to want to embrace it.
Yeah.
And then on the Facebook side, I think the biggest thing that they did was integrate AI into their search platform, and that's why they claim to be the biggest AI company. But it's kind of like a lame way of doing it, right? Like they just put they force you to use it through Instagram when you search, or through Facebook.
Yeah, so it's just there, and they're like, look at how many users we have on it. It's like, no, I just accidentally clicked the button. I'm not actually here to use it.
Yeah, it was kind of lame. So, and I think their open source model thing, I don't think it had the impact that they thought it would, in the sense of like stopping other companies from investing and innovating. And I also think that they're at some point going to flip the switch on that and start thinking about how to commercialize. I think the open source thing was just kind of like their way of cheating.
It was their carrot at the time.
Yeah, and trying catching up and kind of getting more people to adapt it. And I've used their models, and I think at some level it's for the core LLM, it'll continue to sustain. It's pretty good, but once Grok comes out and some of these other models that are just so far superior. It's amazing the half-life on these models is less than a year. And so it's like, it's almost like you have to make it, at some point there's going to be pressure on him to say, all right, am I going to keep spending billions of dollars giving out free models? I just don't see that.
I was going to say last year, I mean, OpenAI went through, I think, 3 iterations, because we ended at 01, right? But you had like Mini, you had one of the turbos, I think, came out earlier in the year, and 4. So like,
I think every hyperscaler probably came out with 3 different models last year. Most of them came out with at least a small, medium, and large. That was last year's kind of trend. Anthropic came out with theirs, and OpenAI, but I think we haven't seen a lot of chips were bought last 6 months, right? Including what Elon bought, as well as OpenAI and as well as Google. And we haven't seen those come online yet, because those typically take 6 to 12 months before they come online. In Elon's case, he got it done in a much shorter time than anybody else, and that might might put him in ahead of the race here for 2025. But assuming everybody else has got all their beautiful NVIDIA chips up and running by now, they've already started training their models by now, so that'll take 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So mid-year, we should see
summer's going to be crazy.
Yeah, we'll see Grok first, and then I think everybody else will follow Grok, and then it should be 10x what we've experienced today. And so when you, by that measurement, it will put Facebook back in the rears, I think, and put Grok ahead of them for sure, maybe even ahead of Google. So yeah, it's just like we talked about. It's an arms race, and it'll be very interesting.
Well, you also forgot about, and we'll kind of leave it on this too. The fourth feature that X is really pushing is that you're going to be able to unleash an unhinged 8th grader bot that's just going to go and rip you on everything that you've ever done on the internet somewhere and really make you feel bad about it.
I've already got that. I just have to. I've got that in real life with my son.
Yeah, I love it, man. Well, no, this is good, and we'll do a check in on some of these, I think, mid-year, and we'll see where some things are at. But yeah, definitely a lot of stuff to keep an eye on, and we'll be hitting a bunch of more topics as we continue here, kind of the first few episodes of the new year, just to set a good tone for it. But for everyone listening, thanks again so much for joining us on this episode. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to stay in touch. Also, check out our Substack for more content, which we link to this episode to continue this discussion. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone.
Welcome to the show.